that they didn't want to discuss publicly. Will they tell these senators what they are doing, even though they keep giving us the runaround? Watch this space. That does it for us tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. The latest breaking news from the New York Times is that Steve Bannon had to be pushed out, that he resisted the move, and at one point threatened to quit if the move went forward. We came this close, Rachel. We came this close to the quitting story.
Threaten me again, big guy.
Surely something can get the quitting story going again. Surely there can be another way of offending Steve Bannon to get him to get that close to quitting.
I wish that I could believe anything they say about themselves. Any White House official ever quoted about anything in the White House, I would love to believe it.
Every once in a while, this may be one of those moments where I want to believe this. I want to believe he was pushed out and then almost quit and then realized, oh, but wait, then what do I do?
You know what? It's more logically possible than he was there to babysit.
Oh, that.
Mike Flynn,
please,
who left 51 days ago.
Rachel, I can't even watch you say it. I can't. It pains me to hear you say Spicer-like things like that. It's just.
I'm going to invent a macro so that whenever you Google anything that was said by a White House official, it gets translated into a language you don't know, that none of us know, so that we stop getting distracted by their by their talking.
Perfect.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Well, last night, in the last 24 hours, we've gotten 45,850 retweets of the tweet that I asked you to help me with last night when I tweeted, hey, Bill O'Reilly, please sue me too, because I believe Wendy Walsh. And retweet if you agree. Almost 46,000 of you have done that. Wendy Walsh is going to join us tonight. She's going to tell us the story of what she experienced with Bill O'Reilly, that sexual harassment story that she told first to the New York Times this weekend. And she's able to talk only because she has not sued Bill O'Reilly, therefore she does not have a multi-million-dollar settlement that then requires her to remain silent. And so, because she has not sued Bill O'Reilly, one of Bill O'Reilly's lawyers threatened to sue her. And that's what that tweet was about. And so you sent that message to Bill O'Reilly and to his lawyers. We will have that story. Wendy Walsh will join us later. But first, is Rex Tillerson going to be the first one out the door of the Trump cabinet, and should he be?
The world is a mess.
I get nervous anytime I hear the president talk about foreign affairs.
That attack on children yesterday had a big impact on me. My attitude toward Syria and Assad has changed very much.
Is it just a lot of words?
I don't change. Well, I do change. And I am flexible, and I'm proud of that flexibility.
I don't think anybody has any clue what he meant today.
I'm not saying I'm doing anything one way or the other.
How many more children have to die before Russia cares? If Russia had been fulfilling its responsibility, there would not even be any chemical weapons left for the Syrian regime to use.
The President of the United States accused the former National Security Advisor to President Obama of committing a crime today and didn't produce any evidence.
He's just a lion sack. I mean, it's just like, it's just simple.
Right now, around the world, people are looking at the White House and feeling completely at a loss of how to deal with this, what to make of it.
Don't you want God to show up and say, I was just kidding about, like, everything? Yeah. I just wish that he would.
Men, women, children, and babies got gassed in Syria this week because last week the Trump administration gave the signal that that was okay with President Trump. That's the signal that they gave. The Trump administration is populated by the worst amateurs in the history of American government, very much including the most untrained and inept Secretary of State in modern history. Having the boss of Exxon become Secretary of State was a cartoonish notion of Republican governance until now. And last week, Rex Tillerson said the most dangerous and irresponsible thing that he could have said, given the state of the world today.
President Assad, should he stay or should he go? I think the status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
Decided by the Syrian people. That is a dramatic turn from the Obama administration position that Assad must go. Decided by the Syrian people, by which Rex Tillerson means the nearly 5 million people who have fled the country to save their lives. Does he mean it should be decided by these 6.5 million people who have fled their homes in Syria but are somewhere still in and around Syria, people who presumably would need absentee ballots in the fantasy election that the horrifyingly dim Rex Tillerson was imagining last week? You saw in that comment why Rex Tillerson doesn't like to speak publicly. Rex Tillerson is as clueless as Donald Trump. The difference is that Rex Tillerson knows that. Rex Tillerson is just smart enough to know where his ignorance begins, which is everywhere in the world, unless it's about making a deal to extract oil. The news media has been far too patient with the silence of Rex Tillerson, and apparently far too busy to have spent much time on the abjectly immoral idiocy that did come out of his mouth last week. Decided by the Syrian people. Last week, that statement included all of the people who were gassed this week and killed. But now it doesn't. President Assad doesn't have to worry about how those people would vote in Rex Tillerson's imaginary Syrian election that would be decided by the Syrian people. What is so profoundly immoral about what Rex Tillerson had to say last week is that he has been so lazy in his approach to his new job, so lazy that he might not have understood that President Assad would take that statement as America's official okay, that he can now do whatever he wants because the United States is perfectly okay with this murderous madman remaining as the president of Syria. Now let's just hope, I really mean this, let's just hope that Rex Tillerson is too much of an amateur to have understood that what he said in diplomatic speak was code language for unleash the gas. Because if Rex Tillerson did understand what he was saying, then he would be a war criminal. Everything Donald Trump has ever said about President Assad has been a signal for Assad to go on killing as many people as he felt like killing that day, any way he wanted to kill them, with or without gas.
I've been looking at the different players, and I've been watching Assad, and I've been pretty good at this stuff over the years because deals are people. And I'm looking at Assad and saying, maybe he's better than the kind of people that we're supposed to be backing.
He was looking at the different players who were trying to kill each other. And he decided that he would come down on the side of President Assad and cheer him on in his killing spree. Someone in the Trump administration has found a way to explain at least some of this to Donald Trump, which is why he said things like this today.
When you kill innocent children, innocent babies, little babies, with a chemical gas that is so lethal, people were shocked to hear what gas it was. That crosses many, many lines, beyond the red line, many, many lines.
Of course, no questioner could get Donald Trump to say what he would do about those crossed lines. Instead, he just talked about his flexibility.
I like to think of myself as a very flexible person. I don't have to have one specific way, and if the world changes, I go the same way. I don't change. Well, I do change. And I am flexible, and I'm proud of that flexibility. And I will tell you that attack on children yesterday had a big impact on me. Big impact. That was a horrible, horrible thing.
Big impact? We have no idea what the big impact was. Changed him? We have no idea how it changed him. He is as lost as Rex Tillerson. Neither one of them have any idea what to do or say about this. Trump voters were told that this kind of thing would magically stop happening in the world on January 20th, when Donald Trump took the oath of office. The world has noticed that Donald Trump is president, and in Syria, that means the return of chemical weapons. And it means that Donald Trump's best friend during the campaign, Vladimir Putin, continues to do everything he can to preserve Assad's position in Syria.
Look at those pictures. We cannot close our eyes to those pictures. We know that yesterday's attack bears all the hallmarks of the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons. Russia cannot escape responsibility for this. In fact, if Russia had been fulfilling its responsibility, there would not even be any chemical weapons left for the Syrian regime to use.
Now there is an ambassador to the United Nations who understood at least today that she does not work for the President of the United States. She works for the United States. Nikki Haley said more wise and helpful things at the United Nations today than Donald Trump has in his entire life, and clearly more than our Secretary of State ever will. If you've been watching presidential administrations for a while, you might be ready to bet, as am I, that Rex Tillerson is going to be the first person out the door in the Trump cabinet. It's not that he's not as smart as Rick Perry, who will be able to outlast him at the Energy Department. It's that Rex Tillerson's in the job where you cannot escape crisis. And Rex Tillerson is lost in that job that is surrounded by crisis every day. He actually issued a statement about the crisis with North Korea, saying, the United States has spoken enough about North Korea. We have no further comment. And that statement now goes straight to the top of the stack of stupidest things ever said by a Secretary of State. And most Secretaries of State don't have any entries in the stupidest things ever said file. As long as Rex Tillerson is Secretary of State and is advising the president, we will be watching the morally blind leading the morally blind. Joining us now, David Corn, Washington Bureau Chief for Mother Jones and an MSNBC political analyst. Also with us, Max Boot, Senior Fellow for National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former defense policy advisor for Romney 2012. David Corn, Rachel has been watching how Rex Tillerson has basically never been saying a word. He famously did not bring the press with him on that foreign trip where he brought just one reporter, and he's stayed very, very quiet. And now when we look back at it, we might just hope for, as long as he's there, maybe him saying nothing is better than him inviting President Assad, as he did last week, to do whatever he wants, because that is, of course, up to the Syrian people.
Well, I think Rex Tillerson's biggest problem is Donald Trump. There is no policy. I mean, if you want to be a little bit sympathetic to Rex Tillerson, I know you don't want to be, Lawrence, but if you do, you say, what should he be saying when the boss isn't saying anything? That press conference today, what did Trump do? He made it about himself. What are you going to do to deal with this, crime against humanity? It's a tough issue. I'm not sure I know what I would advise. But what would you do, Mr. President? Well, let me talk about myself now. I'm flexible. Let me tell you how this has impacted me, because I didn't know there were such things going on in Syria. I mean, the amount of ignorance, arrogance, hubris, and egotism displayed in really about 30, 45 seconds set a presidential record and already into this administration. So I feel almost a little sympathy for Rex Tillerson, because he doesn't know what to say. Nikki Haley decided to say what she said on her own, but none of that is integrated with what the White House will or won't do. So, it's everybody's freelancing, and the guy at the charge only cares about one thing, himself.
And Max, when you have a president who doesn't have a position, which is not common on most issues, the strong people in an administration do have a position, and they step forward, especially because No one's telling them not to. And that's what you saw at the United Nations today. You saw a UN ambassador who stood up and said, this is what I think, and this is what I believe the United States should represent here. And she didn't have to check with Rex Tillerson. She apparently, I mean, why can't Rex Tillerson sound like Nikki Haley?
Well, I think, Lawrence, there's no question. I mean, I wouldn't be quite so hard on Tillerson as you have been, but I will say that he's got a steep learning curve. He clearly doesn't know the job, and anybody who thinks that being CEO of ExxonMobil translates into being Secretary of State has had a rude awakening. But I think the fundamental problem, I think you just put your finger on it, there is no foreign policy in this administration. It is not clear who speaks for the United States government. And so you have people like Nikki Haley, who gives a very eloquent statement, but is she really speaking for the United States government? The weird thing here is that even Donald Trump, the president of the United States, may not necessarily speak for the United States government. I mean, in any previous administration, when you have the president say something, that's it. That's the law. That's the policy. The president is the final word. But in this administration, Donald Trump says stuff all the time, and then he doesn't act on it. He doesn't follow it up. So is the stuff that he says actually going to be implemented? Like today, for example, where he said that Syria had finally crossed some kind of line, which is, you know, I'm sitting here saying, wait a second, this is like the 10,000th atrocity which has been committed by Assad. This is not the first use of poison gas. This is not the first time that kids have been killed. Donald Trump has always been okay with this in the past, but now they've crossed some kind of line. Well, okay, so what are you going to do about it? And there's no clear indication of that. Maybe they'll do something, maybe they don't. But I've never seen, Lawrence, an administration where the words of the principles and of the president himself are so divorced from the actual policy and actions, which just are not there.
David, what I thought I saw Nikki Haley doing today as a very smart political operative, she was just placing the frame around this story, and one of the frames she was placing around it is, this is Russia. This is Russia at work. This is Vladimir Putin at work. And it's now up to Donald Trump to go contradict her on that. Donald Trump wouldn't dare mention Vladimir Putin today in relation to Syria, but Nikki Haley did a flawless job of framing this in terms of Vladimir Putin's support for all of this that Assad does.
You're right, but I think I'll disagree with you a little bit. It's not about whether Donald Trump contradicts her or not. You know, I can see him, or more importantly, I can see Putin looking at that and saying, let her say what she wants to say. She doesn't have power. She's not Donald Trump. If Donald Trump, it's not about contradicting her. If he doesn't back her up, if he doesn't say the same thing, and if he doesn't take any action to marginalize Putin and to point out that this is one of the reasons why someone like Max Boot and myself, who for years have not agreed on anything, can agree on this, you know, that it really doesn't matter what Nikki Haley says, other than she has bragging rights. She can say she took a good line, she can write this in her book, she can write op-eds, but if, you know, Donald Trump doesn't follow suit, Putin will look at this and say, I see where power is. I don't care what an ambassador at the UN says.
I think any former ambassador of the UN would tell you that the way it works in that building is it does indeed matter what the U.S. ambassador says every time the U.S. ambassador speaks. Now, what we're talking about is something else, which is the question of what does it mean in terms of what the United States is going to do next. That's a different issue. It's always been a different issue, in fact.
But right now, I mean, there's an almost complete divorce between the rhetoric of the president and the actual policy, and you have all of these freelancers in the administration running around like Nikki Haley, where you wonder if the president cleared off on her words today. But you also have these powerful players, like today, for example, we saw this inside the Beltway intrigue with Steve Bannon being demoted from his position at the National Security Council, but nevertheless retaining his security clearance, retaining his entree to the Oval Office, and so presumably free to pursue his own policy. And then none of this even touches somebody like Jared Kushner, who is the shadow Secretary of State. I mean, it's stunning how many...
He doesn't speak to anyone.
He doesn't speak to anybody, but he supposedly has the portfolio of Canada, Mexico, the Middle East, China, and reorganizing government. He's supposed to be doing all of this stuff. So what is Rex Tillerson supposed to be doing? What is H.R. McMaster supposed to be doing? You have all these people people who report directly to the president, who are not in the organizational chart, who are not in the normal national security process, but they have tremendous power. I mean, who has more power in this White House than the president's son-in-law? He probably has more power than any previous advisor going back 50 years, and he's probably less qualified to exercise that power than any previous advisor going back 50 years. So I do feel to some extent for people like Rex Tillerson and others, because they're in a very tough position, because they've clearly been outmaneuvered by these people inside the White House, in the White House, who are jockeying for power. That's where the real struggle is going on. And increasingly, Rex Tillerson feels like he's very peripheral to it. He's not at the center of the decision making.
Got to take a break.
You know,
here.
the odd thing, Lawrence,
go ahead, David, quickly.
Quick point is, you know, they're jockeying for power, but they're not fighting over policy. Often they fight over policy in White Houses, but in this case, it's just for who gets the most influence.
It sounded like Nikki Haley was fighting over policy today. We're going to have to take a break here. David Corn, Max Boot, thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Coming up, Donald Trump took his distraction strategy to a new level today, accusing someone else of committing a crime. Not Barack Obama this time, but someone close to Barack Obama. And the president, who boldly bragged about sexual assault on video and audio tape, is now defending Bill O'Reilly, saying that Bill O'Reilly did nothing wrong. And you know what? That may be true. Donald Trump probably thinks there is nothing wrong with sexual harassment. We have some breaking news at this hour. Donald Trump is saying that, quote, the Russia story is a total hoax. He's told that in the New York Times interview today. Today, a spokesperson for former National Security Advisor Susan Rice issued a statement saying, I'm not going to dignify the president's ludicrous charge with a comment. Unfortunately, I cannot be so careful with my dignity, and so we will now comment on the president's ludicrous charge of the day. President Trump said this about Susan Rice in an interview with the New York Times. I think it's one of the biggest stories. The Russia story is a total hoax. There has been absolutely nothing coming out of that, but what you know, what various things led into it, was the story that we're talking about, the Susan Rice. That's hard stuff to read, since it isn't really English. What's happened is terrible. I think it's truly one of the big stories of our time. When asked if he thinks Susan Rice committed a crime, the president of the United States said, I can't comment on that. Oh, no, wait. He said, do I think? Yes, I think. Joining us now, Anna Marie Cox, MTV News senior political correspondent and host of the podcast With Friends Like These. Also joining us is Naveed Jamali, a former FBI intelligence operative and MSNBC contributor and author of How to Catch a Russian Spy. Earlier today, he testified at the House Intelligence Committee members' hearing on Russian influence on the campaign. And Naveed, I just want to go to that. It was a closed-door hearing, but you can reveal to us your part, what you had to say in that hearing according to their rules. Isn't that the way it works?
Yes, yeah, and that's exactly right,
so
Lawrence. You know,
tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I'm sort of flabbergasted that while I was talking about Russia, the statement by the president comes out saying that this whole thing is a hoax. It's
well, not just that it's a hoax, but he has tried in his head and convicted Susan Rice in his head of a crime that he refuses to specify.
Look, well, what I was talking about today was very specifically that, you know, when it comes to how Russians target U.S. persons, and more importantly, which is a story that I lived, I worked undercover over 3 years for the FBI against the Russians in New York. What I told the HIPSI members was that I see echoes in 2016 to what the Russians did with me. And I thought that this, from a tactical standpoint, understanding how the Russians operate, how they recruit people, why they recruit people, how that works, is something that is of huge interest, especially when you look at this, that this is a threat that is ongoing, and it's not just Russia that was emboldened by 2016, it's China, it's Iran, and that was essentially the emphasis of my brief, and I think it was well received. But it is frustrating to have this talk, and on the other hand, the president making these comments about Rice and Russia as a whole.
Anna, I kind of love the reply that I'm not going to dignify it, not going to dignify the accusation with a comment, and yet here we are stuck again. A madman says something that everyone knows he's making up as he says it. He says it to the New York Times. The madman's president of the United States. And so here we are.
It sort of leaves us who talk for a living speechless. We are dignifying it with a response, which is unfortunate. I mean, that's what I keep thinking about as you talk to Navid, which is that we have to talk about this. We shouldn't even have to be talking about this.
Yes.
We should be talking about Russia. We should be talking about the emoluments clause. We should be talking about Jared Kushner's immense portfolio that he did nothing to deserve. We should be there's so many things we should be
But what we are talking about within this is the lie the president told today to try to deal with the fact that he and his administration, his transition team, his campaign are being investigated for their possible connections to Russia during the election and how that might have influenced the election.
And more than that, how they were manipulated, right? Which is what Navid was talking about, which is that, we also had testimony to the effect that the Russians explicitly target Trump with conspiracy theories when they know he's online, right? This sort of sounds like sort of could be something like that. I mean, what is this? It's astonishing, and it's astonishing, we need to talk about this in order to draw it back to the Russians. And we need to talk about this because this is something your first guest talked about too. It means something that we cannot trust the President of the United States. That has ramifications for our democracy. That internationally and domestically, that we cannot take him at his word. And I don't know if we've quite figured out as a country and how to grapple with that, quite frankly.
Navid, every serious intelligence community professional that I've heard talk about this, including Michael Hayden, have said, slow down, unmasking names in these reports is Susan Wright's job. She's supposed to do that. She's only allowed to do that if the agency involved thinks that it should be done. It's not up to her if the name gets unmasked. We've all been taught these rules this week, which most of us didn't know last week, and we haven't been able to find anyone with real intelligence experience who has a problem with this. And at the same time, people like Lindsey Graham and other Republicans who've been pretty good on this issue of the Russian interference, as soon as they heard the two words Susan Rice, they were suspicious. And nothing had taken them off the scent until they heard the words Susan Rice. And suddenly they think that needs to be investigated.
Yeah, this is such smoke and mirrors, such deflection. It goes back to even Executive Order 12333. At the core of this, Lawrence, the U.S. intelligence community does not collect on U.S. persons. And the fact that our president doesn't understand that and yet keeps looking for more creative ways to bring this claim back, whether it's first President Obama, now it's Susan Rice. I mean, it is absurd. There's just no evidence of this. And look, it's not just Susan Rice, just to be clear, that would have had to do this. There's a whole host of people that go in and actually make the change. For them to agree to an illegal order like that, it just would never happen. And yet we have this president that, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, in fact of all the doctrine and laws that prohibit this, continues to make these claims. It is, and then of course, no mention of Russia, nothing about Russia. And I don't know exactly how we address this other than to say exactly what you've been saying, which is, this is crazy.
Quickly before we go, lock her up. Hillary Clinton, they've never said lock him up. Even after President Obama was accused of a crime by President Trump, no one said lock him up. I got a call today from a friend who said, Susan Rice, they want to go after her. Is it because she's a woman, having lock her up as an echo to all of this? And I said, I'm going to ask Anna Marie Cox.
Well, there does seem to be a certain pattern. And it's true. I mean, I think that it might have to do with Trump's conceptions of power. I think that he assumes that men are powerful and that when he sees a woman in power, he's immediately suspicious. She didn't earn it. He also had the same problem with not really believing that Obama earned his power, what with the birther stuff. I always have trouble with words on your show, censoring myself. But I do think that he's innately suspicious of women who have power. He thinks they don't deserve it, and through some nefarious means.
So stuff was your censor word that you used. Yeah. Okay. Navid Jamali, thank you very much for joining us. Anna Marie, we're going to need you for a later segment here. Coming up, Donald Trump, of course, no surprise, defended Bill O'Reilly on the sexual harassment charges today, saying Bill O'Reilly didn't do anything wrong. Donald Trump is an admitted sexual assaulter.
I gotta use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the.
When 12 women emerged during the presidential campaign to say that Donald Trump had assaulted them, he immediately tried to scare them into backing down the way he always used to try to scare people before he got nuclear weapons.
Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
And so that's what Bill O'Reilly did when Wendy Walsh told her story of sexual harassment by Bill O'Reilly. He threatened to sue her for defamation. Today, the president came down on the side of Bill O'Reilly. The president, of course, was not in the room during any of those encounters, which Wendy Walsh will be telling us about. She's going to join us later. And Donald Trump wasn't there for any of the encounters, for which Fox News and Bill O'Reilly have paid $13 million in settlements to people who were left alone in a room with Bill O'Reilly. But today, in the New York Times, Donald Trump said, "I don't think Bill did anything wrong." And that sounds like an absolutely true statement from the President of the United States, who seemingly believes that sexual assault is a sport and not a crime. The President believes all of the worst things described by Bill O'Reilly's accusers are not wrong. Donald Trump doesn't think there's anything wrong with sexual harassment or sexual assault. And so today, an admitted sexual assaulter comes to the defense of a sexual harasser, and the defender did it, surrounded by all of his enablers in the Oval Office. Anna Marie Cox is back with us. And so when the president says, "I don't think Bill O'Reilly did anything wrong," he's telling the truth, isn't he?
He probably is. You know, it's actually Sexual Violence Awareness and Prevention Month in April.
Which was announced by the White House.
Yeah, it was. You know, I think he didn't realize there's a prevention part of the title. I think he just thinks it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and it's sort of like Black History Month, where you promote it, you know. I just want to say, so between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 women is sexually harassed in the workplace. Only 1 in 4 actually report it. And I also want to say that for people like me who've been through it to one degree or another, seeing this happen sort of in real time is incredibly upsetting. I don't like the word triggering. I like the word enraging. And I just want to say that for people out there who may have gone through this, there is help. There are people you can talk to. RAINN has the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which is 1-800-656-HOPE. And you can go online to rainn.org, and they have an anonymous chat where you can be in touch with people who know what it's like and who can talk you through it. You don't have to go through this alone.
1-800-656-HOPE. And Wendy Walsh today called the Fox News hotline to report Bill O'Reilly. She's going to show us some of the video of that. And we smile because the alternative is we need Kleenex, and this is TV, and
or rage.
Yeah,
rage is also the
yeah. No, I find it absolutely enraging, and this just vile defense of his that this happens to everybody who is well known, who has a lot of money. Okay, show me all the complaints against Sean Hannity. Show me all the complaints against Tucker Carlson. I've never heard a word about any of that.
You know, apparently that 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 women that experience sexual assault in the workplace, they all worked for Bill O'Reilly. Yeah. Every single one of them. So.
Anna Marie Cox, thank you for that. 1-800-656-HOPE. Thank you. Coming up, Wendy Walsh will join us. She did not take a financial settlement from Bill O'Reilly, and that means she is free to speak. The honor roll of companies that have pulled their ads from Bill O'Reilly's show now includes Mercedes-Benz, BMW, GlaxoSmithKline, Allstate, Lexus, TrueCar, Coldwell Banker. I'm just flying through some of these names. Everybody should take a look at these, though. Subaru is up there. Of course, Subaru is up there. Carfax, Southern New Hampshire University. Okay, let's keep that up. I'm not going to read every one of them. Keep that up. I'm going to report some of this story here. The Financial Times reports today that federal prosecutors are looking into whether tens of millions of dollars in settlements for Roger Ailes, Bill O'Reilly, and others were concealed from shareholders of 21st Century Fox. Two former Fox News executives claim to the Times, quote, multiple women negotiated confidential settlements with Fox News over sexual harassment allegations, and they claim those payments were moved around different Fox News budgets. The Financial Times reports that, quote, budgetary squeezes raised suspicions among executives that money generated by Fox News was being used to pay off women who had complained of harassment. Fox News would be generating millions of dollars a year in making record profits, one executive recalls, and then suddenly we wouldn't be allowed to travel or buy supplies. It was ridiculous. Obviously, they were moving the money into the money out of the supply budget and the travel budget. For the third night in a row tonight, Bill O'Reilly did not say one word. He is running scared from this subject. And earlier today, Bill O'Reilly's boss, Rupert Murdoch, had nothing to say. Let's watch him say nothing. Go to that video. Let's see this.
About the Bill O'Reilly situation.
There's Rupert Murdoch saying, now put those companies back up while I just read the rest of what I have in front of me here. Put those companies back up. Can we get them up there? Cannot do. Okay, there they are. Wendy Walsh says that she was sexually harassed by Bill O'Reilly, but she did not sue him, which means nothing prevents her from telling her story of how Bill O'Reilly harassed her. Yesterday, one of Bill O'Reilly's lawyers threatened to sue Wendy Walsh for defamation of Mr. O'Reilly's character, and so it was last night that I tweeted, hey, Bill O'Reilly, please sue me too, because I believe Wendy Walsh, and more than 46,000 of you now have retweeted that in support of Wendy Walsh. Wendy Walsh and her lawyer, Lisa Bloom, will join us next.
So here's the deal. If somebody is paying you a wage, you owe that person or company allegiance. If you don't like what's happening in the workplace, go to Human Resources or leave.
And today, Wendy Walsh did exactly that.
In one or two sentences, could you please give me the primary reason for your report?
Yes. In 2013, I experienced sexual harassment as a job applicant at Fox News Channel by an employee named Mr. Bill O'Reilly.
Joining us now, Wendy Walsh, psychologist and radio host who used to appear on Fox News. Also with us, Lisa Bloom, who is Wendy's attorney. Wendy, how did that phone call to the Fox News hotline go today?
Well, I was surprised it was really professional. I think it was an outside agency because she didn't recognize the name Bill O'Reilly, and she didn't know about the O'Reilly factor and had me spell out everything carefully. She was very neutral, so, you know, I liked that because if somebody else is calling in, they don't want to feel judged. They just want the story told. And somebody to get the facts down to begin an investigation.
Wendy, I want you to tell us that story, but let me just quickly check with Lisa on the legal point, because I was struck, Lisa, that O'Reilly's lawyer would threaten to sue Wendy, but that is a common intimidation tactic. He has threatened to sue me. I begged him to sue me when he did that because I would love to get him in a deposition, and that's why I begged him to sue me again within this story about Wendy, because I know he won't, and I'm sure he won't sue Wendy. He won't dare. But give me your legal reading of that.
Well, good for you, Lawrence, and we're so proud of you for doing that. Of course, Wendy's in a very different situation, and when she got that very scary lawyer's letter, you know, look, she's a single mom. She's not a wealthy and powerful person, and she found it very scary and intimidating. She immediately sent it to me. I responded, don't you dare ever contact her directly again. I represent her. And, you know, silence after that.
Let me just clarify. I meant that Donald Trump threatened to sue me. Somehow I blur those two guys, O'Reilly and Trump. Wendy, tell us what happened with you and Bill O'Reilly.
Well, I was invited in January of 13 to come on his show. I was told by the segment producer that he had seen me on TV and wanted me on his show. And 3 weeks after appearing, and often, you know, these sort of segments that he makes special for you that are regular are kind of an audition to become a contributor. And 3 weeks into it, that was proved true to me when his executive assistant sent me an email inviting me to have dinner with him at the Bel Air Hotel, saying he would be in Los Angeles. I was really excited because I wanted to talk about my career prospects at Fox News. And I didn't have to bring them up because at the beginning of the dinner, he brought it up, telling me that Roger Ailes, I'm sorry, I didn't even know who Roger Ailes was at that point, was a friend of his, and the two of them would like to sign off on me as a contributor, a paid contributor. And then we talked about everything else during the dinner. I'm a relationship expert, a psychologist. People confide to me in all kinds of things, and I will leave all that conversation to private, and is this not relevant here? And then at the end of the dinner, he said, let's get out of here. So I assumed we were going to the bar to finish a conversation about my career prospects. And when we walked past the hostess stand, I turned left towards the bar. He turned right towards the suites, the rooms. And we didn't even realize we were walking away from each other until a moment later we turned, and it was kind of awkward. And I said, I think the bar's this way. And he said, no, come on, come back to my suite. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he said, what? Do you think I'm going to attack you or something? And I said, you know, trying to save. I don't want the big boss mad at me. So I just said, Bill, you know, we're both raising teenage girls. I think it's important that we model good choices. He sighed and said, okay. And we went into the bar. Admittedly, it was very busy. It was the night before the Academy Awards. We had a bad table beside the piano. We couldn't hear well. And he immediately became angry, hostile, and insulting to me. And you could see that, I mean, this whole bar experience lasted maybe 15 minutes. I mean, enough for me to get a glass of soda water and him to complain about the price of it. And then I left. And so then I spent a few months trying hard to save the relationship, sending flattering emails. This is what victims of sexual harassment do all the time. We think, well, I'll let him know I'm not a threat. I'll let him know I'm not litigious. I'll get the job he promised me. And I watched him grow colder, more avoidant, more withdrawn on set. There was no chit-chat on the commercial break anymore. And then the last time I saw him, I happened to be in New York on book tour, and I sat down on set with him, and he totally ignored me, except to look up from his script at one point and say, when are you leaving? And then later had the executive producer, David Tabikoff, call me and say, we're going to put your segment on hold. But they didn't ever bring it back.
Wendy, did it come from out of nowhere, that moment where you felt, this is the moment? Was that surprise you, or as the evening wore on, were you getting clues that he might want to go in that direction?
I actually didn't, and I'm a psychologist. I'm usually pretty good at this. I mean, he said a few things like, you're a very beautiful woman, but I work in the television business. It's a visual medium. It's something I've heard before. He wasn't overly flirtatious. He talked to me, as adults do, often, even in business dinners, about the things we care about most, our own relationships, our families, our children. And so, again, I just thought it was, you know, a somewhat pleasant and somewhat intimate, though not sexual, business dinner. And I marched toward that bar thinking he was walking right beside me. That's where we were going. I never thought the invitation to his bedroom.
Okay, quick break, and we're going to be right back with more. We're back with Wendy Walsh and her attorney, Lisa Bloom. Lisa, today in the Oval Office, President of the United States said about this, I don't think Bill did anything wrong. Your reaction to that?
It's so disgusting. I feel like President Trump is making our entire country a hostile environment for working women. He shows such utter disregard for half of the population, even though he's supposed to be the president for all of us. You know, he stands by Bill O'Reilly, who has had 6 women, according to the New York Times, complain of sexual harassment. 2 of them, according to the New York Times, have recordings about some things that I may not even be able to say on your show. I mean, really vile, sexually explicit stuff. In Wendy's case, he's accused of depriving her of a job to which she was otherwise entitled. And this president of ours stands by Bill O'Reilly. I mean, it's just disgusting.
Wendy, the president apparently read this exhaustive New York Times report that includes your story. You were one of the few people in the article who was able to fully tell her story because you haven't entered into a highly paid legal agreement not to. And then today, the president of the United States said, I don't think Bill did anything wrong. How did that make you feel?
Well, I think that really this national discourse that we're having here is training a small group of men of a certain generation who believe in traditional gender roles to the point that women are sexual objects no matter where they appear in their eye line, even in a workplace. And I believe that they are peers in that sense. So that's... You know, he wouldn't understand it. He wouldn't understand that, you know, by the time I got to the bar and I was shaking, worrying about how to save my job, I had to listen to Mr. Bill O'Reilly say, oh, and you can forget about all the career advice I gave you. You're on your own.